Hey, welcome back to a new installment of the Wide Right Podcast. Manny Navarro here, joined once again by Carlos Ledo of the MIA All Day Podcast. It is Wednesday, October 30th, day before Halloween, right around 3:45 p.m. Carlos, the Hurricanes are coming off a convincing 36-14 victory over rival Florida State. They get Manny Diaz and Duke this week, Saturday at noon kickoff. Hurricanes are 4 wins away from an undefeated season, something that they have not accomplished in quite a while in terms of the regular season is concerned. Closing in on a playoff berth potentially. We will get the playoff rankings for the first time next week in terms of who the 12 best teams are in the country. I know Miami will definitely be in the top 12 if they take care of business against Duke. But what were your thoughts coming off of the FSU win? Let's start with that. We will get to a mailbag. We know we have mailbag questions.
Sure. We've been talking for the last, I would say after game one, 7 weeks about Miami needing to be able to establish a running game, that the running game wasn't where it was supposed to be. And they're going to need it down the road to win games when teams figure out a way to slow down the passing game and slow down Cam Ward. We also talked a lot early in the season about how these receivers weren't necessarily getting separation. A lot of the work that Cam Ward was doing, was off him breaking moving around in the pocket, waiting till somebody broke open, and then throwing the ball to an open receiver on a second or third move as they broke out of the route scheme. All of that came to pass against Florida State. And what Miami had to rely on was that running game. And thank God for that they hit it at the right time, that Jalen Rivers has come back at the right time. Damian Martinez has finally figured out how to run within the scheme, and they were able to run for over 200 yards and really put the pressure on Florida State that way. Because if not, it really could have been an ugly offensive performance.
Yeah, it was only 17-7 at the half, and I said this on the Big O show right after the game ended. I thought Mario and Cam Ward both played in control, meaning they weren't reckless in this game. Yes, Mario went for it on fourth and short. Yes, Cam Ward took some shots down the field, but they weren't forcing things. And I kind
Yeah.
of liked that approach, the fact that they were like, look, we don't even want to give FSU a thought that it could win this game. We're just going to do our thing. They got up 14-0, 17-7 at the half, came out, kicked field goals, took the points, only had 8 possessions, but scored on 7 of them, Carlos. I wrote that it wasn't the prettiest of wins because, frankly, Miami's put up better offensive numbers. It's the first time all season that Cam Ward didn't hit 300 yards passing, didn't have a touchdown pass. He did have a touchdown catch. But the point is, it was a two-score game in the fourth quarter, kind of the way that Clemson and SMU both beat FSU, where they were up comfortably, I would say, but not really comfortably, like in the sense where the game was still there, where FSU could have still made a play or two. And so in the end, 22-point victory. But I thought all in all, what I liked was that both Cam Ward and Mario said, you know what? We don't need to blow these guys out like 50-0. We don't need to be extra aggressive and turn the ball over. Let's just do our job. And that's what they did.
Yeah, sometimes being dominant doesn't mean being up 50 points. It means being in control, taking what the opposing team gives you, and being in control of the game from start to finish and never having to sweat it out, which is what they did. It could have been very easily for them to go into Heisman mode and say, well, Cam doesn't have the stats that he normally has. How's this going to affect the race? Let's put it up a bunch of times, even though Florida State's not allowing us to,
Yeah.
and see what happens and see if he finally breaks out and gets some stats up. They did what they had to do to win the football game, and it's good to see that they can rely on that passing game. Now, the next phase of that is we need to see them use play action more because although they were running the football, they really didn't come off play action a whole lot. They still did a whole lot of
Yeah.
drop back with Cam Ward, and I think that needs to be the next evolution of the offense, along with finding some route schemes that get guys open against man coverage when they're playing better DBs like they did against Florida State.
Yeah. Look, this week's challenge is going to be a little bit different. Duke does have a better offense than Florida State. Okay, they've got a running back in Star Thomas who can make things happen. Their quarterback Malik Murphy, his touchdown to interception ratio, much better than Florida State's quarterback. 17 touchdowns, 5 picks for Malik Murphy. But Duke does not have an overwhelming offense either. They're just a better team. Manny Diaz has done a better job with far less talent at Duke than Mike Norvell has at Florida State this year with a team that frankly shouldn't be 1-7. But the point is, they're both teams that Miami has a far superior offense than, but they live off the turnovers. Duke lives off the turnovers. They are, I think, third in turnover margin this year right now among FBS teams. I did my breakdown. Yes, they're plus 12 in the turnover margin, but that didn't help them beat SMU last weekend. I don't know if you watched that game at all, but it was 28 27. SMU ended up winning, but Duke should have won the game. They had six turnovers forced in that game, Carlos, and they kept giving their offense an opportunity to score. Their kicker missed a field goal. They had an extra point that was missed. They had a field goal from 30 yards out. Jafari Harvey jumps over the line of scrimmage. Former Hurricane jumps over the line of scrimmage, blocks the field goal on the final play of regulation. So this is a Duke team that's 6-2, 2-2, but they've lost to both of the best teams that they've played, which is SMU and Georgia Tech, who have winning records. Their wins are over North Carolina, Florida State, UConn, who's a 5-3, kind of lower tier group of five team, and Northwestern. Those are their main wins this season. So this is a game that Miami's favored by 20 and a half points. They should win, but again. You could fall into the trap if you turn the ball over to Duke, and Cam Ward basically has to avoid that this week.
Yeah, and the concerning thing about it is the Hurricanes haven't been getting a whole lot of turnovers in conference play, and they actually lost their turnover battle against Florida State. So that to me is concerning. So, if Duke can get a few turnovers and get themselves some extra possessions, specifically on Miami's half of the field, like I talked about last week with Florida State, they would be able to take advantage in a way that Florida State wasn't able to because they have a little bit more offense than Florida State does. They also bring a good amount of pressure. They're
Mhm.
really good at that, bringing the pressure package. Miami, Manny Diaz, will bring a good defensive scheme. That's what's kept Duke alive this entire time, and what's kept them running in terms of, being in games, being close, winning games. It's been their defense has been the linchpin, not the offense. But again, I think it's just a matter of Mario, Shannon Dawson, Lance Guidry all doing what they need to do to get the win and not getting concerned with this basically being the Miami Coach Bowl, Mario versus Manny,
Yeah.
sponsored on Mario's behalf. I've heard that Pilon, Bustelo, and La Llave are all on his side in terms of Cuban coffees. The
Yes.
only coffee on Manny's side is Café El Águila and some Keurig K-Pods. So, who the real Cuban is in this matchup of Cubans.
We'll talk a little bit more about that. We'll also probably get back in FSU. We have a ton of your mailbag questions, and I want to try to leave the majority of questions for that. But Carlos, last week I had a couple of fans asking questions related to tiebreakers because it is an important weekend. There are some big games. SMU, who we mentioned, is still unbeaten in ACC play. They get Pittsburgh this week, who beat the living crap out of Syracuse last week, and Kyle McCord, a team that was only had one loss and was 5-1 and playing well. Pittsburgh is still unbeaten overall, 3-0 in the ACC. That's going to be a huge game. Clemson hosts Louisville, who came back from 20-0 down to beat Boston College. So you've got four teams. The ACC is really the only conference right now that has four unbeaten teams in league play. There is a scenario, Carlos. There is a scenario where you could have three teams that don't face each other finish unbeaten in league play. That's could potentially screw up the conference championship game. You could go undefeated and not make the conference championship game. The good news is Pitt plays Clemson and it plays SMU this weekend. So to me, it's gonna play itself out in one way or the other. But there is the possibility that Clemson and SMU both beat Pittsburgh. So I've had people ask me, Manny, what's the scenario? How does Miami miss? Is there a chance Miami could miss the ACC championship game? The answer is yes, there is a chance. The likelihood of it, however, is not very big. And so I was answering ACC mailbag questions this week, Carlos. I called the ACC office. I spoke to one of my sources at the league to ask and confirm, okay, the tiebreaker that would determine who makes the ACC championship game if Miami, SMU, and Clemson are all tied. Again,
It's a game of hungry, hungry hippo.
it's a game of hungry, hungry. You nailed it. It is the fifth tiebreaker. I've had people ask me, Carlos. Well, it says ACC opponents combined conference winning percentage. Does that mean the whole schedule? Like, in other words, every opponent Clemson plays and every opponent Miami plays and every opponent? No, that does not mean that. It means just the conference teams and what their conference record is. You understand that? right? So in other words, everybody who plays Miami in the ACC, what is their record in conference? Everybody who plays conference game against Clemson, what is their conference record? Okay, so I did the research going into this week, Carlos. Clemson, Miami, and SMU have two common opponents that all three of them played. Do you know who it is?
Georgia Tech.
No, they all play Florida State and Louisville. They
Yes.
Okay, they've all will play or have played Florida State and Louisville. So what does that mean? You don't need to worry about what Florida State and Louisville do because their record in conference play is going to be the same for Miami, SMU, and Clemson, right? So you have to look at the other six teams, okay? Clemson's six other ACC opponents are NC State, who is 1-3, Pittsburgh, who is 3-0, Stanford, who is 1-4, Virginia, who is 2-3, Virginia Tech, who is 3-1, and Wake Forest, who is 2-2. You add those numbers up, Clemson is 12 and 13. That combined record of the fifth tiebreaker, right? Miami six opponents that do not include Florida State and Louisville because everybody plays them. Cal, they're 0-4. Carlos, they're not doing Miami any favors. Duke 2-2. Georgia Tech 3-3. Syracuse 2-2. Virginia Tech 3-1, and Wake Forest 2-2. You combine those numbers together, it's 12 and 14. Carlos. Then SMU, their six other opponents are Boston College, 1-3, Cal 0-4, Duke 2-2, Pittsburgh 3-0, Stanford 1-4, and Virginia, which is 2-3. Add those numbers together, you get 9 and 16. So right now, if the season ended and you said, well, who gets into the ACC championship game? Based on the fifth tiebreaker, it would be Clemson and Miami. And if you look, there's 3 wins separating SMU from Miami and Clemson in terms of the other teams that they've played in the conference. Okay. Now, each of these teams has one ACC opponent. I know we're getting in the weeds here, and this is probably putting some people to sleep, but you guys asked. You want to know who the hell do we root for, Manny? How does this work? Explain it to me. I'm worried. So I'm telling you, I'm giving you the answer. Each team has one opponent that doesn't play SMU, Miami, or Clemson, meaning the other two teams they could potentially tie with. For Clemson, that team is NC State. They don't play Miami and they don't play SMU. For Miami, it's Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech does not play Clemson or SMU. And for SMU, its team that it needs to root for is Boston College, which does not play Miami or Clemson. Do you understand it, or are you confused as shit right now, Carlos?
I get it. I get it. So, we need Georgia Tech to win as many games as possible outside of the game against Miami, and we need those other opponents, NC State, and who was the last one for SMU?
SMU was Boston College,
And Boston College to lose as much as possible as well
right? In conference,
in
in
conference,
conference games.
right? And ultimately, you just need to win out. Really, just win out.
Just went out, take care of business. Now, there is a scenario. There is a scenario where you could potentially have three teams with one loss, right? I don't even want to get there. Right now, everybody's undefeated. But if we get to that point, Carlos, if Miami somehow loses an ACC game and Clemson has one ACC loss and SMU or Pittsburgh have one ACC loss, right? We'll get to it then. We'll worry about it then.
Yeah,
But for right now,
I
this
think
is what
that
it is.
tiebreaker is everyone gets together, all the teams that are tied, and they just have one big game of Double Dare at Universal Studios Hollywood,
Yes.
or Orlando, depending on who those teams are, what the travel restrictions may be, and they
Hmm.
just go after it, man. And whoever gets slimed the least is the one that goes to the conference championship.
Correct. Absolutely. That's the way that it really should be done. I personally think they should just be the two highest ranked teams that make it, right? Because that would take into account how you do in non-conference play. Rankings do have something to do with what your strength of schedule is, all of that kind of stuff.
That's
Uh,
reasonable.
but I'm reasonable, and God knows college football is not reasonable.
Exactly.
So there you go. We're gonna get to your mailbag questions here in a minute. But Carlos, I wanted to ask you this before we moved on here. Of the three teams that I mentioned are basically tied with Miami atop the ACC, Clemson, SMU, and Pittsburgh. Which one do you fear?
I don't know that I fear any of the three. The one that concerns me the most would probably be Clemson, just because I think they're, even though statistically it doesn't seem like it, I think they probably have the best matchup in terms of defense and their offense is playing well enough that I think it could be a challenge, especially if they turn Miami over. They could capitalize on it, although their red zone offense still isn't great this year. SMU. to me is a little scary just because I think Rhett Lashley would come up with a good offensive game plan. He's doing it all with a quarterback that really isn't very efficient throwing the football, which is pretty surprising. A lot of people see him as, an air raid quarterback passing guy first, especially from his time down here in Miami when he had Derek King. But he's done a great job structuring that running game and keeping them in games and doing what they need to do to win. And they have a good defense as well. So I would put those two ahead of Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh to me, although they're having a fantastic season and they're undefeated right now in conference or overall, I don't know that I believe the hype just yet.
Yeah. Here's what I would tell you. I break down, I do my oddly specific predictions for the Athletic every single week. And believe it or not, Carlos, I'm well over, I think I'm about 70% in getting games right this year. And look, I picked Duke to upset SMU. That was my upset of the week last week. One of my two losses. I went 7-2 with my picks. I really thought Manny Diaz was going to pull it off, but they had their whole kicking fiasco that we've already covered. But I did break down all three teams this week because they're playing pretty meaningful games. SMU, Pitt, Clemson. A couple of things to share with you, just as Miami fans who are interested about ACC Championship. Manny, who do you think would be the better opponent for us, etc. SMU has played a far, I think, tougher schedule. They've got two teams ranked in the top 30 that in terms of the ESPN Power Index, Louisville and BYU. BYU is undefeated. They're the Big 12 leader. They lost to BYU at home. I think their opponents, they're a little bit more battle tested
Hmm.
than some of these other opponents. Pitt has wins over Cal, who's 34th in the ESPN Power Index, even though they don't have an ACC win yet. They've got a win over Cincinnati, and they've got a win over West Virginia. Cincinnati and West Virginia are kind of middle of the pack teams in the Big 12, but good wins for them, right? And then Clemson has basically only played one team ranked in the top 68 of the ESPN Football Power Index. That's Georgia. I think I lost that game. Every other win for Clemson to this point has been FSU, who's 69th in the Power Index, Virginia, who's 73rd, NC State, who's 78th, Wake Forest, who's 89th, Stanford, who's 94th, and App State is who's 100th. Now, Clemson will be facing tougher competition here in the weeks ahead. They're going to get Louisville on the schedule. I mentioned they're going to play at Virginia Tech. They're going to have the game at Pitt. So we'll find out what Clemson is really made of. But some interesting little things here, Carlos, because again, while I know you think Clemson is probably the most talented of those three teams and the better of those three teams, um, they're fourth in scoring offense, averaging 42 points a game, 61st in points allowed. Okay. Of the four teams, they give up the most points. Pittsburgh is sixth in scoring offense, 40 close to 41 points a game, 45th in scoring defense. And SMU is 15th in scoring offense, 39 points a game, and 36th in defense, 21.4. Miami, by comparison, number one scoring offense in college football, 46.8, and 38th on defense, 21.5. So when I look at it and I think, what is the kind of team that can beat Miami? I think it's a team that can slow the game down, run the football, keep Cam Ward off the field and the offense off the field, can get to the quarterback, put pressure on Cam Ward, and can score enough points and has explosivity enough to beat Miami where they could match them for score for score. Do you think that's the kind of team that can beat Miami?
Um, yeah, again, it's the sort of matchup you get at the right time, right? If it's not just about the sort of style they play, but it's sort of the personnel, how they match up as well.
Hmm.
I think if you get a team with good defensive tackles that takes a little bit more space in the middle, that has aggressive D tackles like a Darrell Jackson did against Florida State, that will occupy those guards in that center where it's a little bit weaker in the interiors from what we've seen recently in terms of pass rush and run blocking. I think if you've got a quarterback that won't turn over the ball on the other side and that can make some plays that get you enough points to score and win, and yeah, in a running game that'll slow the game down and keep possessions away from Miami. And I think Florida State showed that if you take possessions away from the Hurricanes, rather than giving them 11, 12, 13 possessions, you give them 7 or 8. You try to force them into a mistake by them pressing. They didn't press against Florida State, but as the season wears on and they're playing for something bigger against a better opponent, maybe you see that happen in a closer game. So to me, I think, Clemson with that running game, And Clay Klubnik can have that effect on offense. Defensively, they've given a bunch of points, but again, what's the matchup? I think their corners, their safeties, their secondary is a little bigger and more physical than the other two teams in SMU and Pittsburgh, and I think that bothers Miami receivers. I think the one advantage that Miami usually has coming in against DBs is that Isaiah Horton matchup and Xavier Restrepo in the slot. I think Jacoby George struggles against bigger DBs and stronger DBs. We've seen that, and we've seen Miami struggle against man coverage where they can't run away. And I think Clemson will play that a little bit better than the other two teams. So I think that's why I put Clemson number one. And like you said, with SMU, I put them second because they could score, they could run the football, and they've got a good pass rush and a solid defense.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think look, Pitt is an interesting team to me. Um, because I feel like Pat Narduzzi, just the change in offense alone, like he's always been such a really good defensive coach. I have more faith of the three teams in Pittsburgh's defense to be able to find ways to affect Cam Ward. And it's interesting though, because this week I started to do a little bit of research. I looked up some numbers. I wanted to see because you think about it, Carlos, last year, what was the knock on Tyler Van Dyke, right? What was the knock on him as a quarterback?
Zone defenses, you can't read them.
Could not read zone defenses, correct? I think I sent you these stats, did I not? I think I
Yes, you
sent
did.
this to you yesterday. I want to look up which quarterbacks in the ACC um, use or play the zone the best, play man defense the best, and then I wanted to see which defenses use the most zone because that was the Achilles heel for Tyler Van Dyke. Well, here's some interesting numbers. First of all, Miami has the most balance in the league in terms of using man coverage versus zone. Okay. The split is literally like 48.9 to whatever, 49.1 in terms of man zone. They use it just about even. Okay. Um, North Carolina State it plays the most man next to Miami. The team that plays man the least in the league, Carlos, is Pittsburgh. They use zone coverage more than 80% of the time. Uh, SMU uses zone 72% of the time. And Clemson is a little bit more closer related to Miami. They use zone only 53% of the time. And this is again, these are just the top teams. Clemson is third in terms of man usage. Miami's first. Pittsburgh last in man usage. SMU 13th in terms of man usage. So I came over and I looked up what are the stats. Who are the highest rated passers in terms of man coverage? Well, SMU's Kevin Jennings, number one in terms of passing efficiency against man coverage. 5 touchdowns, 1 pick, 58% completion percentage, averaging over 12 yards of completion against man. Cade Klubnik for Clemson. He loves facing man defense. He's number two. He's 186.9 passer efficiency, 8 touchdowns, 1 pick, 70% completion percentage, 9.1 yards per attempt. Um, Cam Ward, fifth in the league against man, 168. Uh, Passer efficiency, 67.5% completion percentage, 8.3 yards per attempt, 8 touchdowns, 1 pick. Pitt quarterback, Eli Holstein, 15th out of 16 ACC qualified passers versus man. He much more prefers zone. He's 103.4 quarterback efficiency rating, 4 touchdowns, 2 picks, only completing 46% against man coverage. 4.6 yards attempt. Interesting numbers, right? I mean, we talk strategy here on the show all the time. Now look at quarterbacks versus zone. I'm sharing this for you guys, okay? Cam Ward, number one quarterback in the ACC against zone coverage in terms of passing efficiency, 179.1, 13 touchdown passes, 4 picks. He's averaging 10.8 yards a passing attempt when he throws against zone coverage. Cade Klubnik, he's number two, which tells you Clemson might have the second best quarterback in the league, right behind Cam Ward. Uh, he is 10 touchdowns, 2 picks, 164.6 QB efficiency, 8.9 per attempt. Eli Holstein, third versus zone, 164.6 efficiency, 6 touchdowns, 3 picks, 10.1 yards per attempt. So, Carlos, I read you those numbers, and you being a quarterback guy, what does that tell you? What is the best strategy for Miami maybe against those teams? And how do you think Cam Ward would fare against those teams?
Well, from a Miami perspective, it's clear that those receivers, when you get pressure in Cam Ward and you play man, and those receivers aren't able to break away, then that causes problems, like we saw against Florida State. I think that was the one team that showed that what you can do, sort of the game plan for what people, or the blueprint, or what people are going to be doing moving forward. If you can get pass rush at Cam Ward, get in his face, and cover those receivers with man on the back end, then you're going to slow down that offense and force them to run the football. If you create boxes, right, 4-2 box or a 4-1 box where Miami sees that and now they're going to have to take that matchup advantage and run the football, you slow the game down and start to cut those possessions down and force them to plod down the field rather than get chunk plays in the passing game like they've been used to. So to me, if I'm a defense facing Miami, I try to do what Florida State did, right? Play two high, play one high, play man, mix in zone here and there, bring a blitz from an angle here and there. Specifically to me in the A gaps between the guard and center, or right over the center. Those are the areas where they're having some problem with the blitz and pressures. And then, do what you can to slow Miami down and get them to run the football against you and make them drive the field. From a defensive perspective for the Hurricanes, whatever quarterback you're facing, whatever the weakest areas are, is what you got to throw at them. But it all starts regardless of what you're playing on the back end for the Hurricanes, whether it's zone or man, it starts with that front four. If that front four can get pressure and get in a quarterback's face and make them get rid of the football quickly, then that makes that back end even more difficult in terms of disrupting offenses because now the quarterback doesn't have time to set his feet to read the defense and really make the accurate throw or make the right decision. Now they're looking for the hot read to get rid of the football and just get it out of their hands or taking a sack. And that's what you want.
Yeah, I think it tells us all of those numbers tell us a couple things. One, I think it kind of proves why Miami struggled, right, against Florida State. They played man, they had the two high safeties, basically said, we're not going to let you beat us over the top. And it shows you why Xavier Restrepo has so much value too,
Yeah.
right? Like the fact that he is so good at finding soft spots in coverage and being effective. I would love to see the numbers for receivers and how they do versus man and zone, but I'm willing to bet Xavier Restrepo is number one against zone coverage, maybe in all of college football.
Yeah, you line up a nickel on him or even a backer or a safety on him, and it's a mismatch. He's really good at finding the open slots, and even when he's covered, he makes difficult catches. Right? He's been known to make an acrobatic catch and really make contested catches. So he's sort of become the complete receiver, the complete package there in the slot. And I think the other thing you're seeing is, the air raid offense is predicated when they're running zone against you. It's one of the reasons why Cam is so good against the zone is you're allowed to sort of make options and decisions as a receiver based on zone coverage where you're finding openings in the zone, gaps in the zone. So they're taught to run to grass in the zone in the scheme of the air raid against zone coverage. Against man, they're taught to run away from man,
Yeah.
whereas they're taught to settle against zone in the open grass. So that's why they're having more success against zone because they can find that open grass a lot better as opposed to against man where they're taught to run away from it and they're not able to win those one-on-one matchups necessarily. So then what the offense now has to do and what you're seeing with Shannon Dawson when he tries to do every once in a while in the game is they'll go wide bunch, right? They'll go trips to one side, bunched up, and try to get rub routes that way. They'll try and maybe put one guy in motion and maybe run a wheel. But it's been stuff they've been running all season, so the defense was prepared for it this past weekend. They've got to do
Right.
a better job of being a little bit more inventive moving forward.
Well, just for you guys know going into Saturday's game, Duke runs the fourth most man coverage in the league behind Miami, NC State, and Clemson. So I would expect that Manny Diaz knows these numbers that we've talked about, right? And that's what he's going to employ on Saturday against the Canes.
And you know what Manny Diz's defenses are known for? They're known for trying to get tackles for loss, right? That's what
Hmm.
their idea is. They try to get into the backfield. They try to readjust or win the line of scrimmage and push it back further into the quarterback and try and make plays that way, either through pressuring the quarterback or bumping the running back off his path or his track to make those plays and let the linebackers flow to it. So Miami, I wouldn't be surprised, and I'd like to see them maybe run some draw stuff, some delayed stuff, some counter stuff and some screens, some middle screens to try and help alleviate that a little bit.
Yeah. All right, let's get into the mailbag questions. I know you guys have a lot of those. Carlos, I want you to help me out with them because people ask really interesting stuff, and I think it's good for us to just continue the conversation there. But we covered a lot of key points, the ACC race. We covered Cam Ward and how he does against coverage and what teams have thrown at him, especially coming off the FSU game and what we saw in that game, why he didn't necessarily have a huge statistical game. But I think we can definitely say that the fact that Miami is running the football better, right,
Yep.
is really encouraging as we get to the second half and potentially a playoff run here for this team. All right, let's start with the mailbag. Let's go to Coach White. Number one question from him is who is the MVP for defense so far? I'll let you go first, Carlos.
Ooh, MVP for defense. Huh. Uh, I would say early on it was Barron.
Hmm.
He slowed down over the last couple weeks. It's hard to say, man. Um, maybe Wesley Basaint. He's played well. I don't know. I don't know who to say to be quite honest with you.
I'm gonna go with Simeon Barrow.
Yep,
Simeon Barrow,
that makes sense.
it's funny. He leads the team with 5.5 sacks, but he's been super effective. His run defense grade, according to Pro Football Focus, is the best on the team. You look at snap count, he's 11th in snap count. Most of those interior defensive linemen don't play a ton. He's second on the team among interior defensive linemen to Akeem Mesidor. But the point is, he is highly, highly effective when he is in there. He creates plays, he creates mismatches on the interior. And you think about all of the transfer portal signings, right? Going into this season, Carlos Cam Ward is obviously number one, but I think we have to say Simeon Barrow might be number two.
Yeah, him, Barron, and also I think have been a great additions to that defensive line. But you noticed his presence not being there when he was out. There was a big change in how they defended the run, and they didn't do a very good job of it. So he's definitely been, if he's not the MVP, he's close to it.
All right, two positions. This is another question from Coach White as a follow-up. Two positions they need to spend top dollar on in the portal for next year.
Corner and safety.
I agree. I think, look, they've got some young guys that they're excited about. They've got some guys in this potentially in this signing class that they're excited about that they think are going to be difference makers. The problem is it is really hard to come in as a true freshman at that position, safety or corner, and make a huge impact right away. I think there are guys that are going to take a step from year one to year two. I think OJ Frederic is going to be good for them. I think Ryan Mack, who hasn't played a ton this year, will eventually take a step up. But I think you need to do what you did this year, where you went out and you got Mish Powell, who is a smart, very cerebral player, solid player, not a superstar, but somebody who can hold the fort down until somebody else develops. Ideally, you would like a Caleb Downs or somebody of that ilk, right? A superstar
Yeah,
who is unhappy at another place or doesn't, doesn't think they're gonna win there or whatever, and wants to come to Miami to win a championship. Ideally, you'd want to target somebody like that if they're available, but I don't think those grow on trees, Carlos. And I think sometimes landing elite guys in the secondary is really, really hard in the portal. I think you see a lot more defensive linemen. I think you see a lot of quarterbacks. You will see receivers, but DBs are very prized, and most defensive coaches don't let those guys just get up and walk out.
yeah, but I think what you're seeing now is as the evolution of NIL moves forward and the evolution of the transfer portal, I think like you're talking about, there's guys that are disgruntled or on programs that maybe aren't performing the way they should,
Yeah.
and they're just their value to that program isn't as great as they'd like it to be because their talent isn't necessarily translating to wins on the field because the talent around them or the coaching, whatever the case may be, and they want to jump to a program where they can be elevated in terms of their profile, not just from, a player perspective and a stat perspective, but also a winning perspective. So I think maybe picking off one top flight corner and one top flight safety is doable if there are guys in the portal or guys on programs right now that are, middling somewhere else that could definitely be high impact players on a program that's on the uprise, on the upswing.
A- And I would say on the offensive side of the ball, I think you still need to go out and get a quarterback. I know there's a
Yeah,
lot of
no,
faith
no
in Emory
doubt.
Williams, but I think without question, now that you have some momentum with Cam Ward, that you got to go out and try to address that position again, just to bring somebody else in who can compete, and the best man win, and that's it. That's just the way you have to operate going forward. All right.
Absolutely. And I think you're probably going to have to go out and get a center again.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I know Rodriguez was a guy that they were excited about, somebody that they were hoping would be healthy this year and potentially move into that kind of role. He got injured in the Florida game. But it is what it is. Sometimes guys never get over the injury bug. They're unable to get to the point that they want to get to.
Or
And
maybe he's
so
better suited as a guard.
yeah, I don't know. Maybe we will see. I know this. You're gonna have to replace Jalen Rivers. You're probably gonna have to replace Inez Cooper. You're definitely gonna have to replace Zach Carpenter. You have potentially 3 to 4 starters that could be gone just depending on the clock. Maui Noah will be the one guy who for sure comes back. Cooper's in his third year. He can go pro if Miami wins a national championship or pushes the envelope. I know his numbers haven't been great, but again, you don't know what's going to happen. In terms of year to year to year. So maybe offensive line is a position that you address with center in particular.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nino Francavilla is another guy that I know that they specifically recruited for that position. Will he be ready in year two? He's a true freshman right now. I don't know. So, but yes, I agree. I think center is for sure. All right, this is from Columbus Kane. Do you think Dawson calls more screens or quick routes against Duke to counter the anticipated pressure? What other wrinkles do you expect? I'll let you answer that one.
I think they should call some screens. I think they should call some middle screens, especially against that, like I talked about, their decisions or their structure of trying to get reset that line of scrimmage and make tackles for loss. Um, I think they're going to have to use more motion. I think they're going to have to use more formations to try and get
Hmm.
rubs and try and get that defense to bump over and misalign or miscommunicate on the back end when it comes to their coverages. I think just really they're gonna have to protect Cam Ward. I think they're also gonna have to maybe use Cam McCormick a little bit more, to try and add an additional offensive lineman in there. He's shown he can catch the football every once in a while, so might as well toss it to him if you can. But I think using Cam McCormick a little bit more to try and defend that pressure, and also using motions, formations, alignments, and even using using your personnel differently, like aligning Jacoby George in the slot, maybe putting somebody else in the backfield in a two-back set where you have a receiver and a running back rather than two running backs, and trying to use that to try and get a matchup on a linebacker. Doing things like that. Using also some of your running backs that you haven't used a whole lot of, maybe a Chris Johnson, or even a Jordan Lyle in the passing game to try and free some things up, and using screens with them to try and get their speed involved.
Yeah.
So you've got to try and do something different. I don't think if they come in with the same game plan, the offense is going to be highly effective. They'll probably score another 30 points, but it won't be what we've been used to over the first 7 weeks of the season.
All right. This is AM Cruz 44 AC on Twitter. Hot take, maybe not so hot. Miami needs to play more like they did Saturday against FSU than they did the previous seven. Points are fun, but balanced football and overpowering opponents win games. I agree. I think this is the style that you will see in the playoffs.
I think you need to use whatever style works best for the particular game you're playing and the opponent you're playing, right? So, I mean, it doesn't make sense to run the ball 40 times against a team that's secondary is terrible, right? It only works when you're playing against a team where you have the advantage up front and where they're daring you to run the football, and you've got to do what you got to do to win. But I think what they need to do moving forward is, like I said earlier on, you've got to show the ability to go play action, because running the football is great, but you also want to be able to get some yardage in the passing game and get some chunk plays there. And they didn't do that because they really didn't do a whole lot of play action against Florida State.
Yeah. And in general, they really haven't. I mean, they kind of want Cam to be able to see the field, and extend plays. You don't want to cut yourself off at the knees. Sometimes you're rolling the dice. He throws a pick, could put you in a bad situation. But I think his point ultimately is that a little bit of ball control doesn't hurt
It
either.
doesn't. It doesn't. But again, like it's one of those things where it's not, one or the other. I think Cam will have more opportunities to make chunk plays. I said this before the season started. If that running game is rolling and teams now are getting chunked up in the running game, eventually you're going to have to move guys down into the box to try and stop that and support the defense up front against that run game from the secondary. Once they
Right.
do that, you go play action, and the read's going to become easy because guys are going to blow open off that action.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Let's get to some more questions here. I looked away for a minute because I have a message from one of my editors, so I apologize for that. This is from Cali Kane 818. Outside of Cam and Ruben Bain Jr., who are your key players on offense and defense on Miami to achieve their ACC championship and success in the playoffs? Well, I mean, look, it's fairly obvious. We just mentioned Simeon Barrow on defense. He's got to continue to play, I think, at an elite level. You need interior defensive linemen to be at an elite level to win conference championships and have success. I think Damian Martinez has to run more like the running back we've seen
Yep.
the last 2 weeks. I think Xavier Restrepo has to remain healthy. He is a go-to, reliable weapon that needs to be counted on. Um, And I would say Mish Powell, like him, your left tackle. If it's Jalen Rivers, he needs to play at an elite level. Does it Markel Bell? I don't know. You need to have certain cornerstones that sort of are there that can be counted on. You can't lose those guys to injury and have as much success as you've had to this point. The
Yeah,
depth
I
just isn't
think
there yet.
I think Misha Powell and Jaden Harris need to step up and play at a higher level for them
Hmm.
to really make noise in the playoff. I think Francisco Mauigoa needs to step up and play better to be able to sort of solidify that defensive front from the linebacker position heading into the playoffs. I think offensively, like you said, you've got to decide who that left tackle is going to be, who that best five is going to be up front, and roll with that. I get that they want to continue to get Markel Bell snaps because he's earned it. If he's earned it, then give him the left tackle spot and move Jalen Rivers inside permanently and just go with the best five. To me, those are the five that have looked the best with Markel Bell at tackle and Jalen Rivers at guard. And like you said, you've got to have more of that Damian Martinez we saw Saturday or the last two games, really. And I think you also got to find ways to get the ball in Isaiah Horton's hands and Sam Brown's hands and find a way to get Jacoby George opportunities to be explosive.
They'll find ways. Cam Ward has proven that. By the way, Kiko Mauinoa did play one of his best games of the season against Florida State. Granted, one of the worst offenses in the country, but he was better in coverage. He knocked the pass away. I thought he was one of his better games of the year, which is encouraging. You need to start
Yep,
putting some good games together.
absolutely.
All right, this is Jason Real Hip Hop. Cam has affected our receiver play tremendously, but next year, does it make it even more necessary to recruit higher level wide receivers that can beat man coverage since we're likely going to have a downgrade in the quarterback play? Well, look, I think every single year you want guys that can beat man coverage. Part of it is development. Part of it is
Yep.
teaching. Part of it is, getting guys to learn and recognize what it is that they're doing wrong. Miami's never had necessarily a talent issue at the receiver position. I just think they just haven't developed guys the way they need to. Having a quarterback like Cam Ward makes your entire receiver room look better than it is. But I've also told you, hell, they need to get more guys to get
Having a guy like
drafted.
Jeremiah Smith would make your quarterback look a hell of a lot better
Yes, yes. So, but those guys do not grow on trees. They don't. And yes, South Florida
Well,
has
listen, Manny, that's the second time you said that. They need to plant some damn trees then. All right? We need to go to the
well,
farmer's market. We need to get some seeds. We need to do some shit because they have to do it. They've got to get better receivers.
look, as long as Ohio State still has the Brian Hartline and the best guys in the country are going to Ohio State most years, you're going to be behind. You got to win those recruiting battles. You got to get those elite guys to start coming here, and change the narrative a little bit. I think having Cam Ward put up the kind of season he has, having Xavier Strepo, have the season he has and potentially get drafted on day two, day three of the draft, starts to build a little bit of faith in those type of elite receivers who finally have an example to say, hey, look, I can go to Miami and get drafted if I play quarterback or receiver.
Then also maybe getting a an elite quarterback before spring football in the transfer portal might help it as well. That's not always, a possibility, but that would be a
Hmm.
goal. That would go a long way.
Yeah. All right. This is Asher Wildman. With the transfer portal being such an integral part of roster development now, who is in charge of monitoring that and recruiting? Who is the new Alonzo Highsmith on staff? Well, look, I got news for you, Asher. It's been Mario Cristobal. Part of the reason Alonzo Highsmith is not at Miami anymore is he wanted to have a bigger role than he did. Mario is the czar of all of that. Now, are there people who assist him? Yes, there are people on staff who monitor the transfer portal. There are people on staff who target other people, before they're even in the transfer portal, right? Who break down film. But ultimately, every personnel decision in terms of who Miami is offering a scholarship to, who Miami is ultimately taking a commitment from, comes back to Mario Cristobal. And that's the way it is in college football. Yes, I know there are football GMs. Yes, I know in college football has started to change, but Mario Cristobal is the guy. He is the guy, and it's the bottom line. It's just the way it works at Miami.
Yeah, and he's the guy you want doing it, to be quite honest, because that's his forte. He's really good at identifying talent, not only just identifying talent, but talent that he thinks fits the way he wants to play. which
Hmm.
is very important. That aligns with his system, that aligns with his culture. And he's proven that over the years. He's discovered guys even in FIU, like a T.Y. Hilton, guys that other people weren't even looking at.
Yeah.
He identifies talent very well, and he's good. He's really good at doing it, and that's what he gets off on. He loves the recruiting part of this. As much as he loves the X's and O's and the competition, he loves and embraces the competition of recruiting and identifying talent and getting those guys over here.
All right. Armando Izagirre, AY2 Mondo on Twitter says, if the season ended today, who do you think Miami cannot beat in a playoff matchup, and who do you think we could beat? Who do you think is the roadblock to Miami winning a national title, Carlos? Who do you think would knock them off in the playoffs right now? How many teams would you take over Miami?
You know what? I'd take Georgia if they were in the playoff. Texas, even though they lost to Georgia, I think they're still good enough to beat Miami. Um, who else?
I would say Ohio State. I know that their offensive line isn't as
Yeah,
good as maybe some of these other teams that have an issue with left tackle. But I think Ohio State certainly has the talent and depth. Will Howard, I think, is pretty solid. I think Oregon could beat Miami. And I think Tennessee. I think there's probably five teams that I don't like matchups with Miami. And part of it is they have the dudes on the defensive lines to cause problems, to disrupt Cam, and they have guys that can run the football. Tennessee's got a really good running back in Dylan Sampson. Their offense isn't necessarily very explosive. Nico Iamaleava has not had a good sophomore season, but they can do it. Quinn Ewers is a very good quarterback. Arch Manning's a very good quarterback. Texas can score points. I don't think any of those teams are unbeatable from a
right.
Miami standpoint. I think Miami could beat all of those teams. I think Miami can win a national championship. I said this to you guys, I don't know how many podcasts ago, Carlos, it was a while back. Um, I just think there are matchups that would put them in a very, very precarious position because there are weaknesses on this team. The offensive line, that was my concern coming into this year, right? The depth. I didn't think they were going to be as good. Cam got sacked four times. Some of that was Cam holding onto the ball. Some of that was Cam just feeling the heat because Florida State brought some defensive ends that could get to him and some blitzes that could break through. So I look, they're not perfect. They're not. Miami is not an unbeatable machine, but they're also very good and good enough to win a national championship.
Yeah, like you said, I think it depends on the matchup. I think some of those teams have areas of weakness that Miami could exploit, while some of those other teams have areas that Miami will have a very hard time defending or trying to score against.
All right, Kane Finn says during the FSU game, it was obvious our wide receivers struggled to get separation from good man coverage. Corners, I felt like Dawson lacked creativity to scheme guys open, even though we put up a decent amount of points. Will this bite us in the rear in the postseason?
I mean, I don't know. I've never talked about that before, so I've never said anything like that. I never talked about any of these topics that we've talked about today all season or for the last couple of years. But yeah, will it bite us in the ass if they don't get a little more creative and they don't get guys moving and doing the kind of stuff that I've been saying? Maybe.
Here's what I found a little bit troubling about the FSU game. Elijah Roy only had two catches for 24 yards and two targets, and I felt like he could have utilized the tight end a little bit more to cause some problems. Now, was that Cam Ward maybe not looking for the tight end? I don't know. I didn't do the snap counts. I didn't look over every ounce of film. But I feel like teams that want to leave the middle of the field open and take away the big play on the outside, you got to expose them a little bit more on the inside. Restrepo had four catches for 24 yards. Arroyo, two catches for 24 yards. That's not good enough. You need to figure out ways in the middle of the field to beat teams, and I think that's what I saw in that game.
Yeah, and I think like I said before, it's the same thing we talked about last year. One, get the tight end involved, because you should have a mismatch every time when you have a backer or a strong safety on Elijah Arroyo. He should be able to beat that coverage.
Hmm.
Two, get the running backs involved. I don't think there's linebackers that could cover, a Chris Johnson or Jordan Lyle, or maybe even Damian Martinez coming out of the backfield one on one. Use those guys in the passing game. I think, using routes like angle routes or what they call a Texas route, essentially, where the running back comes out over the tackle and then angles back over the middle of the field, trying to run away from coverage against man. That's very helpful. I think using screens to the backs are helpful. We haven't seen many bubble screens either this
Hmm.
season. Not that I can remember. We've seen quick screens, not bubble screens. And I think incorporating some of that, where you've got the defense having to flow out to the sideline and defend and come up, will really help. And then countering off that with a pass over the top. I think there are things they can do that don't change the offense, that are just adding to it, that can be done to help. But I don't know if that's going to happen.
We don't know. I
I'll leave
think
it at
the
that.
ne- and I don't think the next couple of weeks we're going to see that either because I don't think they're necessarily going to be in trouble in any of these games. I don't think. Where
Yeah, I don't
where
anticipate it unless you turn the ball over a whole lot.
Yeah. Marcus Williams, Money Kane says, just saw that Dawson is interested in the Rice head coaching vacancy. Do we have anyone else on staff with experience as a play caller? Any names to know if does Dawson does eventually leave after the season? Kevin Beard is not a play caller. He's a
And they're
receivers
going to
coach.
go outside for an offensive coordinator.
Yeah, Mirabal is not a play caller. Matt Merritt, I don't think has ever been a play caller. He's a running backs coach. Um, tight ends coach, no. Yeah, the moment your coordinator leaves for a head coaching job, and I think there's a chance that he will finally get that opportunity, Shannon Dawson, especially if they've got the number. It's not often the number one scoring offense keeps their offensive coordinator the next year. I should probably look that up to see how many times they've actually stayed around. Um, so yes, Mario will have to find somebody else. Who knows who it'll be? Look, we know he's like Toledo's coach for a long time. Toledo's coach never leaves there, Jason Candle. But maybe this is the year that happens. I don't know.
We're going to do the Jason Candle flirting again. We're going to do Candle in the win again. Come
Listen,
on, bro.
there will be something that happens this
All right.
offseason.
We're going to have to queue up the Elton John then before the end of the season.
Andrew V underscore 17 says, do you think they need to rely on the run game more? It looks like the O line went from being good at pass protection to being good at run blocking. I I look, every offensive line has different strengths. Every year it changes when you change the parts. Yes, I think this team has improved at run blocking. They weren't necessarily great at it early in the year, but I think part of it is the defensive strategy that you're seeing as well.
Yeah.
When teams are pulling the safeties out and not bringing them in, you can run the ball for 7 yards a pop, right? You can average 7 8 yards a carry when teams are putting their safeties deep in coverage. It's just the way it is. You have to take what the defense gives you.
Yeah, absolutely. And the run game should always be part of the game plan. And it's like you feed the hot hand. What's working for you on offense? What's the strategy? What's going on? Where do you have the matchup advantages? And you do what you got to do to win.
Yeah. Vitamin D, Saunders in 3D says, CJ, Chris Johnson, number 24, needs to be more involved in Miami's passing game or someone who can take the top off of defenses and free up the others. Passing game can use some fresh juice, and Coach Shannon has a Ferrari in the garage. Yes, I think Chris Johnson is a really intriguing player. When I watched him in high school, he was super explosive in the passing game, has not been very involved in the passing game yet. But I will remind you, Vitamin D, that part of coaching strategy is to save stuff, right? And to wait for the right moment to unveil things. Chris Johnson has 8 catches for 72 yards and 2 touchdowns to this point. I'm looking at his numbers. Caught one pass for 3 yards the other day. The last time he had multiple catches was against Ball State. Um, the element of surprise is important. Elijah Lofton, 8 catches for 133 yards and a touchdown. All of those guys that we haven't seen yet, I guarantee you, if Miami needs to bring out a wrinkle, those guys will be involved.
Manny, this offense has Botox. It's had Botox for the last 2 years. I haven't seen a wrinkle yet.
I think Shannon Dawson is saving some of this.
Yeah, he's saving it until he gets to Rice.
Michael Bonassar, M Bones 12. I was looking at the roster and there are not a lot of seniors on it. What players do you see exploring their options to leave early, and how might that affect the team next season? I just said it. Look, we're in a different area of college football. Every single year, um, guys that can go to the draft are going to consider it. James Williams Probably shouldn't have entered the NFL draft. What did he end up getting picked? Fifth round, seventh round? I forgot where it was. Seventh round. Um, it's for some guys, this is just about making their dreams come true, right? Um, it's you're gonna lose guys every single year to the portal. You're gonna lose guys every single year to the draft. It's just part of what you have to accept now as a fan.
Yep.
I would not look at eligibility other than who has played 3 years already. When you see that, make the demarcation line there. And if that guy is a backup, let's say that's a first or second year player, that's a backup that knows they're going to get on the field, 99.9% sure you're going to get them back the following season. Everybody outside of that, somebody's nowhere on the depth chart. If somebody is not playing whatsoever, they're all probably going to leave.
Fair game. Open season.
Yeah. All right. This is from Jeff RCJ Matt. Isn't it ironic that Manny Diaz's defense might be the hardest challenge left till the ACC Championship? What do you think, Carlos?
I think Alanis Morissette would agree.
Ricardo Gomez, R. Gomez Addy. I'm from California, so I'm just curious. Was there a big uproar when it was announced that the Canes were going to move from the Orange Bowl to Joe Robbie Stadium? Yes, many, many years ago, there were a lot of people, old people, particularly ones that owned houses that made a lot of money off of parking, that were upset that Miami was leaving the Orange Bowl for what is now known as Hard Rock Stadium.
My
But
man's
I
been in a time capsule, Joe Robbie Stadium. I love it. I love that he still calls it Joe Robbie.
Ricardo Gomez. Yes, we lived it, Carlos. But you know what? I think there certainly were enough people who thought, well, they got to do something with the Orange Bowl. It's crappy.
Yeah, like peeing in a trough wasn't fun.
That was not enjoyable for a lot of people. All right, this is from G Gem 0790 on Twitter. Look at the current top 12 teams. Who do you think Miami could beat in a playoff game? Who do you think they have little to no chance of beating? We did this already, G. Hope you listened to that part of it. Rafi Rodriguez, RR Rod 54. Odds Shannon Dawson stays another year versus finding a head coaching job somewhere. What do you put it at, Carlos?
50-50.
I'd say probably 65-35. He's gone.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I think the one thing that'll push him to leave is he probably senses that he's not going to have a quarterback like Cam Ward next year, that he's
Hmm.
going to have some holes on that offensive line that he's unsure about. So he knows the offense probably isn't going to be as good, likely not going to be as good as it was this year. So if he doesn't take his shot this year, he may not get one next year or one as good next year.
Right. All right, this is from E Renton RC on Twitter. Will QB 2 and 3 stick around next year and compete for the job or transfer out? Do you expect as many QB ones entering the portal this year as they did last year? As long as people are paying a lot of money, you're going to see a lot of quarterbacks that want to make more money hit the market. And I think as long as NFL teams are being honest in their evaluations of players and saying, we think you're a day two or a day three guy, I think some of those guys that can say, I'll make more money playing one more year in college instead of going pro will consider it more often because there is money to be made in this.
Yeah.
Uh, that
Yeah, and I
wasn't
think if they
always
go
the
in if
case.
they go in the portal and they get another quarterback, I think you'll probably see 2, 3, and maybe 4 go. And it'll be just that guy in the portal and Luke Nickel and then anybody else they may pick up as a backup.
Yeah, I think Emory Williams is probably the only guy who stays.
You think he would
Um,
say?
I think he will if he thinks he has a legitimate shot at the starting job. But again, it depends on does the OC leave? Does it, what other kind of changes happen? Who does
I think
Miami
if they go out and get a star quarterback in the portal, I think Emory leaves.
very well could happen. And then you basically stay with your freshman, which is
Yep.
the way it works in college football now. If DJ Lagway comes to town,
Yeah, Emory's hitting the road.
Matt Cruz, Matt the greatest. Hot take, Miami has the best trenches and running back room since 2001. Could lead to huge playoff success. Probably the best depth in the running back room since 2001. Best trenches, I don't know. It's
I don't
arguable.
know. Let's argue. I don't know.
All right. We're gonna wrap up here. We got a ton of questions. We're gonna try to get through these faster here. Tyler Overly, if Cam continues at his current pace, completion percentage, yards, touchdowns, interceptions, assuming we win the ACC championship, what would it take for another candidate to take the Heisman from him? Well, Tyler, I'm glad you asked. Carlos, what did I say at the beginning of the season about Travis Hunter?
You probably thought that if he had a good season, he'd probably win the Heisman.
Colorado has 2 losses, right?
Yep.
Why did I say that he would win the Heisman? What did I say that there's fatigue over what quarterbacks winning the Heisman?
Yep.
I just work here. I just work here, Carlos. I mean, I just work here.
I just show up for the free food.
Yeah. J.K. Slay, would secondary be better served moving Porter back out to corner where he thrived last year and give someone else a shot at nickel? Well, Damari Brown was supposed to be the nickel.
Yeah, my guy, J.K. Slay, come on, bro. You listen to the show every week. You've heard me say the same thing. Come on, dude. Stop taking my points and using me as a question. You've had this answered before.
Rashawn 954. Besides quarterback, what other positions do you think Miami looks more attractive to now for top players in the portal? Running back, wide receiver. Uh, Listen, man, if you can contend for championships and you pay well, there ain't nobody in the country who doesn't want to come play for you. So,
Yeah.
a lot of positions. Dapper Quan, there's a world where we go 12 and 0 and miss the ACC championship due to tiebreakers. Would you rather make the ACC championship and take our chances, or not make the ACC championship and take the 5 seed, where we would play the 12th seed and then the
You want
fourth
to get
seed?
to the ACC championship, win it and get a bye. You don't want to take the risk.
I got news for all of you. Um, when the first playoff rankings come out next week, don't be surprised if you're disappointed with where Miami is in the standings. Just saying. They may be top four because the ACC or the people who projecting the top four seeds say, well, you got to have the ACC team up there. But remember, the rankings have nothing to do. The poll that comes out, the top 12, has nothing to do with
Projected
ultimately
winner
where
of
they
the
get seated.
conference.
Right.
Right.
The seeding is done at the end.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, uh, how much money did ESPN spend to buy the SEC?
A buttload, I think was
How
the
how
exact number.
how much did Fox spend to get the Big Ten?
I think a double buttload.
I'll leave it at that.
And guys, come on. Do you really believe that if you left this into the hands of the committee that they would be the honorable gentlemen they say they are and put Miami in the playoff if they have a chance to eliminate them? Come
Yeah.
on, man.
Last one, we're gonna go. Well, we have our familiars here. Hurricane Q 16V Lover. A little late with this question. Carlos, do you think that FSU exposed Cam's weakness, which is that he may be a rhythm quarterback and needs to throw the ball consistently throughout the game in order to be deadly? Do you agree? And if so, how does the OC adjust?
I
Adelante, go Canes.
Yeah, I don't think it was a Cam Ward issue as it was just guys not being open. I mean, Cam tried to give him and buy as much time as he possibly could back there to let guys break free and get open and make plays. I don't think it's about rhythm. I think it's about guys just not getting open, breaking free. Um,
Hmm.
I think that's what FSU exposed. I think if Cam, even if he's not in rhythm, if guys are open or he's got a window, he makes the throws. So I think he showed patience this game against Florida State and didn't force throws, which I liked. He didn't make the big plays he used to, but he did what he had to do to win the game.
I don't think he's a rhythm guy. I just think he's a guy who takes what the defense gives him. He tries to make the big play. He
I
bite.
think he learned from early on in the season where maybe against Virginia Tech and Cal, he forced it a little bit.
Yeah. And I think ultimately the coaching staff decided, look, you don't need to win this game. We can run it. And once they were having success running the football, he didn't care,
Yeah,
which is good. You need to show that as a quarterback. The NFL looks at that just as much as, hey, are you just all about stats and numbers?
absolutely.
Brent Peterson, B Pete 9121. You get the last question. What does Cam Ward have to do to win the Heisman? It feels like the national media is quick to put anybody who has a pulse over him. Miami hate back in full force. Again, Brent, I don't think it's necessarily Miami hate. I said this is quarterback winning the Heisman fatigue. Um, Ashton Genty and Travis Hunter to me are the two favorites right now. And I think the only way Cam wins this is, I said this before, going undefeated, winning the ACC championship, and I would venture to say Travis Hunter and Colorado probably lose 2 or 3 more games. And then Ashton Janty and Boise State lose another game or two. Right now, Boise State is one loss team. Their only loss is to Oregon, and it was by 3 points. So people are putting Boise State on a super high pedestal, even though they played Oregon. I think it was week 2 or week 3 of the season, and Oregon really wasn't playing well yet. And they're giving them far more credit than I think Boise State probably deserves. And you'll see once the playoffs start, if they're the group of 5 champion who gets in, you'll see Boise State get exposed by better teams. Um, but they have that in their hat. And I don't think it has anything to do with Miami. I think this could have been Drake May in North Carolina last year. Let's say this was Drake May in North Carolina, or Clemson and Cade Klubnik. Let's say Clemson was the undefeated team here. If they had a win over Georgia, they'd probably be getting more credit. Miami's problem is they don't have a win over anybody that's notable.
Nope.
They just don't.
And they
And
won't until the ACC title game.
right, and even then, let's say it's Pitt. Are people
Yeah.
going to give them credit for beating Pitt? Are people going to give them credit for beating an SMU team that lost to TCU? Are people going to give them credit for beating Clemson, who lost big time to Georgia? Come on, bro. We know how this game is played.
Yep.
Be real. Don't be fake. That's
Exactly.
all.
I
That's what
love
we
it.
do here.
I love the hood knowledge at the end. I love it.
Carlos, anything we need to promote for you at the MIA All Day Pod? Are we going to hear from our favorite listener soon?
Yes, we should. We should. Just had some stuff going on this weekend that prevented him from getting on the show, but we'll get him on soon.
All right. Make sure you check out Carlos at the MIA All Day Podcast. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast, the White Right Podcast, wherever you download and listen to your podcast. You can follow us on YouTube, and you can also subscribe to The Athletic because that helps me as well.
Yes, please do.
Appreciate you guys. We will talk to you next week.
Peace.